Title: I found my wife's photo in a gossip column. And it changed everything. I was never the type to believe in love at first sight. But when I met Isabella Laurent at a marketing conference in Los Angeles, something shifted. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. I was a rising marketing executive, working my way up from nothing. She, on the other hand, was the daughter of a luxury fashion mogul, born into a world of privilege and expectations. We were from different worlds, and I should have seen the warning signs from the start. But I didn't. We fell fast. Passionate, reckless, all-consuming love. Her family disapproved, of course. They saw me as a nobody, a man who could never measure up. But Isabella didn't care, or so she said. Against all odds, we got married. There was a strict prenuptial agreement, an undeniable reminder that I would always be an outsider in her world. Still, I convinced myself it didn't matter. Love would be enough. For a while, it was. Our life was picture-perfect from the outside, lavish parties, exotic vacations, the kind of existence people envy. But behind closed doors, something felt off. There were late-night calls she wouldn't explain. Mysterious business trips. The way she sometimes looked at me, like I was a stranger in our own home. And then I saw it. A random morning. Coffee in one hand, my phone in the other. I was scrolling mindlessly when I stumbled across it, a photo in a gossip column. Isabella. Dressed to perfection. Leaning in too close to a man I didn't recognize. Her hand on his chest. The headline: Heiress caught in midnight rendezvous with mysterious companion. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, my mind scrambling for an explanation. A misunderstanding? A setup? I zoomed in, searching for something, anything, that would prove me wrong. But the look in her eyes, it was familiar. A look I once thought was reserved for me. I confronted her that night. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she sighed, poured herself a glass of wine, and said, "Ethan, did you really think this was forever?" The words hit harder than any lie ever could. I realized, in that moment, that I had been the only one fighting for this marriage. The only one who believed in the illusion of what we had. And now, standing in front of the woman I thought I knew, I had to make a choice: fight for something already broken, or walk away before it shattered me completely. I think I already knew the answer. I stood there, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, my heart pounding. The woman I had built my life around, the woman I had sacrificed for, was looking at me like I was some naive fool. And maybe I was. "Did you really think this was forever?" The way she said it, so casual, so indifferent, like our love had been nothing more than a fleeting amusement for her. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "So, how long?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. She tilted her head, considering. "Does it really matter?" I let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah, Isabella. It does." She sighed, swirling her wine lazily in the glass. "A few months. Maybe longer. But Ethan, don't act so surprised. You knew, deep down. You just didn't want to see it." I clenched my jaw. "And who is he?" She smirked, and that hurt more than anything. "Someone who understands the life I come from. Someone who doesn't have to try so hard to fit in." There it was. The truth, raw and ugly. I had spent years convincing myself that I belonged in her world. That love could bridge the gap between where I came from and where she had always been. But love was never enough, was it? Not for her. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fight for something that was already over. I stepped back, nodding slowly. "All right." Her brows lifted. "All right?" "Yeah," I said, exhaling. "I'm done." For the first time, she looked genuinely surprised. Lavro, February 14, 2025, 6:26. Maybe she expected me to yell, to break down, to fight for her the way I always had. But I was tired. I turned, walked to our bedroom, and grabbed a suitcase. I wasn't going to spend another night in a home that had never truly been mine. As I packed, I heard her voice from the doorway. Softer this time. "Ethan." I didn't stop. "Is that it?" she asked. "You're just leaving?" I zipped up the suitcase and finally looked at her. "You left first." Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Maybe, for the first time, she realized what she had lost. Or maybe she didn't care at all. Either way, I wasn't staying to find out. As I walked out of the house, the weight on my chest didn't lift, it only grew heavier. I had spent years trying to build something real with Isabella, and now, with a single photograph, it was all gone. I didn't have a plan. I just drove. The city lights blurred past me, my thoughts tangled in a loop of how did I not see this coming. But deep down, I knew I had seen it. I had just ignored it. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You deserve to know the truth. Meet me at the Lexington Hotel. Room 714. I frowned, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Who the hell was this? And why did they care? For a second, I thought about ignoring it. But then I remembered the way Isabella had smirked at me, the way she dismissed everything we had like it was nothing. If there was more to the story, if there was something I didn't know, I had to find out. So I turned the car around. The Lexington Hotel was one of those upscale places where everything smelled like money. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel like you didn't belong unless you were wearing a suit worth more than your rent. I took the elevator up to the 7th floor, my heart pounding. Was this a setup? A joke? Room 714. I hesitated for only a second before knocking. The door opened almost instantly, like the person inside had been waiting for me. And when I saw who was standing there, I felt the ground shift beneath me. It wasn't a stranger. It was him. The man from the gossip column. The man Isabella had been with. And he was waiting for me. I froze. Up close, he looked different from the grainy tabloid photo, sharper, more polished. Dark suit, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that came from old money. He studied me like he already knew everything about me. Come in, Ethan, he said, stepping aside. I should have walked away. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I had come this far. I had to know. I stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat on the table. You know who I am, I said, keeping my voice steady. He nodded. And you don't know who I am. I clenched my jaw. I know enough. You're the guy my wife's been screwing behind my back. Something flickered across his face, something I couldn't quite read. Pity. Amusement. Is that what she told you? He asked, almost curious. I frowned. I saw the photo. I confronted her. She didn't deny it. He exhaled, shaking his head. Of course, she didn't. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Sit down, Ethan, he said, pouring himself another drink. There's something you need to know. Something about Isabella. Something you never saw coming. I didn't move. Why should I trust anything you say? He took a slow sip, then met my eyes. Because, Ethan, he said, setting his glass down. She's been lying to both of us. My blood ran cold. What? He leaned forward, his voice calm, controlled. You think I'm the other man? You think she's cheating on you with me? I swallowed hard. Isn't that the truth? A small smirk played at his lips, but there was no humor in it. No, Ethan, he said, shaking his head. I'm not the other man. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I'm her husband. The room spun. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My wife, my Isabella, was already married to someone else. And I had never known. Lavro, February 14, 2025, 6:26. The world stopped. I stared at him, my mind scrambling to make sense of what he had just said. Her husband? No. That was impossible. I was her husband. I had signed the papers. Stood in front of witnesses. Said the vows. But he was still watching me, calm, composed, like a man who had been through this already. I forced myself to speak. That's a lie. His smirk didn't falter. Is it? I shook my head. I don't know what game you're playing, but I married Isabella 2 years ago. Legally. Officially. There's no way. Check the records, he interrupted smoothly, leaning back in his chair. You'll find that Isabella Laurent married me 6 years ago. In Paris. Under her real name. My pulse hammered against my skull. Her real name. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. A few taps, and then he slid it across the table. I hesitated before picking it up. My hands were shaking. It was a scanned document. A marriage certificate. Her name was there. Isabella Laurent, clear as day. But beneath it, in smaller text. Born, Isabelle Levine. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Levine. That wasn't her last name. Not the one I knew. I looked at him, my throat dry. This doesn't prove anything. He chuckled darkly. Keep scrolling. I did. And then I saw them. Dozens of records. Different variations of her name. Different locations. Different men. Different marriages. My breath hitched. She's a con artist, Ethan, he said, his voice eerily calm. She marries rich men, drains them dry, and moves on. You're not the first. And unless we stop her, you won't be the last. I felt sick. My whole relationship, my marriage, had been a lie. I had thought I was special, that what we had was real. But I was just another name on her list. I swallowed the rage burning inside me. Why are you telling me this? He exhaled, his expression unreadable. Because I made a mistake. I let her get away. And if we don't act fast. His jaw tightened. She'll disappear again. And this time, she'll take everything from you. The air in the room felt thick, like the walls were closing in. My mind raced, trying to process everything he had just dropped on me. But one thing was clear, I was far deeper in this than I'd ever imagined. I looked back at him. You're telling me she's done this before? With other men? He nodded, his eyes hard. She's got a pattern. Charm them, marry them, take what she needs, money, status, connections, and then disappear when they're too deep to pull out. You're not the first, Ethan. But you might be the last if we can catch her in time. I slammed my fist on the table, fury bubbling up from somewhere I didn't even recognize. How the hell do I even know you're telling the truth? You could be lying to get me to help you take her down. His expression didn't change. I've already paid the price for my trust in her. I'm here because I want to stop her, before she destroys someone else. And you, he leaned forward, his gaze cold but sharp, you're the one she's underestimated. You're the one who can bring her down. I felt a chill run down my spine. My hand hovered over the phone he had given me, the marriage certificates, the records, the history of betrayal. Why me? Because, he said slowly, she thinks you're too in love to see it. Too weak to fight back. But you've got something she doesn't anticipate, something she never expects. I stared at him, 1,000 thoughts swirling in my mind. And what's that? Anger. His words hit harder than I expected. But there was a quiet truth in them. I had been too blinded by love. Too willing to overlook the red flags. I had let her dictate the terms of everything. But now I was furious. Furious at myself. Furious at her. I had been played. I gripped the phone harder, suddenly desperate to know more. So, what do we do now? He smiled, the first real emotion I'd seen from him. We get ahead of her. We take everything she's taken from us, and we make her pay. She's running a game. But every game has an end. Lavro, February 14, 2025, 6:26. And we're about to call checkmate. I leaned in, my heart pounding with the same fire that burned through my veins. I'm in. What's the plan? His eyes narrowed, calculating. First, we make her believe she's won. Let her think she's gotten away with it all. Then, we turn the tables. We find the right leverage. We expose her for what she really is. I felt a thrill run through me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back what was mine. About showing her, and myself, that I wasn't a pawn in her game. We'll make her regret ever crossing us, I muttered, more to myself than him. His smile deepened. Exactly. And just like that, the plan was set into motion. The game was no longer hers. It was mine. The adrenaline hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in weeks, I felt alive, like I wasn't just some victim waiting to be hurt. I was taking control. I wasn't going to sit back and let Isabella destroy everything I had worked for. She had underestimated me, and I was about to show her just how wrong she was. The next few days were a blur of calculated moves. I started digging deeper, going through every document, every record, every conversation I could find. I reached out to people in her past, people who had been burned by her. It wasn't easy to get them to talk, but money has a way of loosening tongues. And then there was the phone call. I hadn't expected it. It came late one night, the number unfamiliar, but somehow I knew it was important. I answered, my breath catching in my chest. Ethan, her voice came through the line, smooth and calm, the same voice I had once trusted with my heart. I know what you're doing. My pulse spiked, but I kept my tone steady. What am I doing, Isabella? You think you can outsmart me? She asked, the faintest edge of amusement in her voice. You think you figured it all out? I didn't say anything at first. The silence stretched between us. I wanted to scream. To tell her how much she had hurt me. But I couldn't let her see that. Not now. Finally, I spoke. I'm not the one who's been hiding things, Isabella. She laughed softly. Oh, Ethan. You really have no idea, do you? Her words made my skin crawl. Something wasn't right. She was too calm. Too collected. What are you talking about? I demanded. You think I don't know who you're working with, she said, her voice chillingly casual. I know everything. And if you keep digging, you won't just be playing with fire, Ethan. You'll get burned. My heart skipped a beat. Was she threatening me? Don't try to scare me, I said, my voice low. But the doubt she had planted took root. She knew something I didn't. She was always a step ahead, and now, for the first time, I was beginning to feel the weight of that. She sighed on the other end, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. You should have stayed away. But now, we'll see how far you're willing to go. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there, staring at the phone in my hand, a sense of unease creeping over me. I thought I had the upper hand, but Isabella was playing a different game. A much darker one. And now, it wasn't just about taking her down. It was about surviving the mess I had unwittingly walked into. The next few days felt like a slow-motion train wreck. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing a dangerous game, one that I wasn't fully prepared for. Every move I made seemed to be countered before I could even blink. I kept digging, calling contacts, finding hidden accounts, piecing together more of her past, but every time I thought I was close to uncovering the truth, I found myself hitting dead ends. It wasn't just that Isabella was elusive. It was that she was watching me. Every call I made, every lead I followed, I felt her presence in the shadows. The subtle way she'd pop up in places I hadn't expected, at the office, in the crowd at a gala I attended for work. It was like she was everywhere, always one step ahead. And then it happened. Lavro, February 14, 2025, 6:26. I was sitting in my apartment late one night, going over documents when the doorbell rang. I hesitated. No one ever came by this late. I peeked through the peephole and my breath caught. It was her. Isabella. I froze. I hadn't seen her in days. The last time we spoke, it had been on the phone, but now she was standing there, her face calm but unreadable. A faint smile tugged at her lips, like she knew exactly how much control she had over me. I opened the door slowly, keeping my distance. What are you doing here? I asked, trying to mask the panic that rose inside me. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. I think we need to talk, Ethan, she said, her voice smooth, like we were still friends. Talk. I repeated, almost laughing. About what? She turned, her eyes locking with mine. There was something different about her now. A coldness. A certainty. You've been digging into my past. Trying to ruin everything I've built. I couldn't hide the anger that surged through me. You've ruined everything, Isabella. You lied to me. You've been lying to everyone. She looked at me, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something. Was it regret? Or just manipulation? I couldn't tell. Is that what you think? She asked softly. That I lied to you? Yes, I shot back, stepping closer. You married me under false pretenses. You never cared about me. You never cared about us. Her expression remained unfazed. Ethan, you've always been so naive. You were never part of the plan. I felt the ground shift beneath me. What do you mean? She tilted her head, studying me as if I were some specimen she was studying closely. You were just a way to pass the time, Ethan. A distraction. A way to keep up the act. But now, her voice dropped to a whisper. Now things are more complicated than you think. The air between us grew thick with tension. My pulse was pounding in my ears. What do you want from me? I demanded. Her lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. I want you to understand something, Ethan. You think you're the one in control, that you can expose me. But you have no idea how deep this goes. I didn't just marry you for your money. I married you for much more. I stared at her, trying to make sense of the words she was saying. What are you talking about? She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a low, almost seductive whisper. You really think you're the only one who can play this game? I didn't have time to respond before she stepped back, her eyes glinting with a dangerous light. You'll find out soon enough, Ethan. But when you do, it'll be too late. Without another word, she turned and left, leaving me standing there, feeling more lost than ever. I was in over my head. And the worst part? I had no idea who the real enemy was anymore. The next few days felt like a storm was building, and I was stuck in the middle of it, powerless to stop it. Isabella's words haunted me, you'll find out soon enough, Ethan. But when you do, it'll be too late. What did she mean by that? What kind of game was she playing? I spent hours searching through every possible lead I had. But nothing made sense. I was getting closer to the truth, I could feel it. But each time I reached for it, something, or someone, pulled it out of my grasp. It was like I was running in circles, chasing ghosts. Then, late one night, I got a call that changed everything. It wasn't from Isabella. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it hesitantly. Mr. Carter, a man's voice said, cold and clipped. We need to talk. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Who is this? There was a brief pause before he responded. You don't know me, but I know everything about you, Ethan. Everything about Isabella, too. I gripped the phone tightly. What do you want? His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street. 10 p.m. Be alone. If you want to understand what's really going on, you'll come. Lavro, February 14, 2025, 6:26. If not, well, you'll regret it. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, heart racing, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I had no idea who this guy was or what he wanted, but something told me I had no choice but to go. If I didn't, I might never get the answers I needed. I made my way to the warehouse that night, the moonlight casting long shadows across the empty street. The place was abandoned, dark, and eerie, with broken windows and the smell of old, rotting wood. It was the kind of place you read about in crime novels but hoped you'd never find yourself in. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty space. The air was thick with dust. And then I saw him. A man, standing in the middle of the room, wearing a black hoodie. His face was hidden in shadow, but his stance was confident, almost like he knew exactly what was about to happen. Who are you? I demanded, my voice breaking the silence. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, studying me like I was some puzzle he was trying to solve. Finally, he spoke. You're in deeper than you realize, Ethan. And if you don't wake up to what's really going on, it's going to cost you. Cost me what? I shot back, growing more impatient. Everything, he replied simply. I took a step forward, trying to read his body language, trying to figure out who he was and why he was so sure of what he was saying. Is this about Isabella? The man nodded, his eyes flashing for just a second. She's playing a dangerous game, and you're in the middle of it. But there's more to her story than you know. Much more. I swallowed hard. What are you talking about? He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. Isabella Laurent is not who you think she is. She's not just a con artist. She's part of something bigger. A syndicate. A network of people who use people like you, rich, ambitious, desperate, for their own gain. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? He looked around the warehouse, as if checking to make sure we weren't being watched. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, she's not just taking your money, Ethan. She's setting you up. And when she's done with you, you'll be the one left holding the bag for everything. I felt the blood drain from my face. How do you know all this? The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because I used to be like you. I was one of her marks. But I woke up. And now, I'm here to warn you before it's too late. I stood there, stunned, trying to process everything he had just told me. Isabella, my wife, wasn't just running a scam. She was part of something far more dangerous. And I was in the middle of it, whether I liked it or not. Before I could say anything else, the man turned and walked toward the exit. Come with me if you want out. If you want to stop her. I was frozen, torn between everything I thought I knew and the terrifying possibility that my entire world had been a lie. But as I watched him disappear into the shadows, I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't go back to the way things were. I had no choice but to follow him into the unknown. I stood there for a long moment, the words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Could I trust this man? Could I trust anyone anymore? Every piece of my life, every decision I had made in the last 2 years, felt like it had been a carefully constructed lie. But there was something about him, something in the way he spoke, that made me feel like he wasn't just another player in Isabella's game. I didn't have much time to think. I grabbed my coat and followed him out of the warehouse, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. The street was empty, and the only sound was our footsteps echoing against the pavement. Where are we going? I asked, keeping my voice steady even though my mind was racing. The man didn't answer right away. He led me down narrow alleyways, through darkened streets, until we arrived at a small, inconspicuous building. Lavro, February 14, 2025, 6:26. It looked like a storage facility, nothing special about it at all. He pushed open the door and motioned for me to follow. Inside was a completely different world. The room was dimly lit, filled with stacks of files, computers, and piles of paperwork. It looked like a makeshift operations center, but I had no idea for what. The man walked over to a table in the corner, where a laptop sat open. "Sit down," he said, pulling a chair out for me. "You need to see this." I sat down reluctantly, still on edge. "What is this place?" "This is where we keep the records of everyone she's worked with. Her partners, if you want to call them that." He tapped a few keys on the laptop, and a series of documents popped up on the screen. The first one was a list of names. Names I didn't recognize. He pointed to the top. "This is where it all starts, Ethan. Every person who's ever been involved with Isabella." I leaned in, my eyes scanning the list. My heart was racing again, this time with a different kind of fear. These weren't just businessmen or con men, these were people with power, people who could disappear without a trace if they wanted to. The man clicked on a name, and a new set of documents appeared, more files, more paperwork. But this time, there were photos. And the more I looked, the more the pieces started to fall into place. "Isabella's not just using people for money," the man said, his voice low and grave. "She's part of a larger operation. An international syndicate that moves money, resources, and people across borders. And you," he looked at me sharply. "You were the perfect target. You were easy to manipulate, Ethan. You were hungry for success, and she knew that. She could play you like a puppet." My mind was spinning. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the vast unknown below. I had thought I was just a victim in a bad marriage. But now, I was tangled up in something far darker than I ever imagined. "So what's the next move?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man didn't hesitate. "We expose her. But we have to be careful. If she catches wind of what we're doing, it's over. She'll disappear, and you'll be left holding the bag, just like the others." "But how do we expose her?" I asked, my voice growing more frantic. "How do we stop her?" "We have to go after her network," he said, his eyes intense. "She's been using you, Ethan, but she's also been using everyone else she's ever been with. People who can't afford to let her get away with it. If we reach out to them, get them to work together, we might have a chance." I felt a rush of something, maybe hope, maybe fear, but it was there, pulsing through me. For the first time, I felt like I had a real chance to take her down. "But how do we even start?" I asked, my mind racing with the possibilities. The man grinned, a sharp, dangerous smile. "We start by getting to the one person who knows everything. The one person she trusts more than anyone else. Her brother." I froze. "Her brother? Her brother?" I echoed, not quite able to wrap my head around it. "Yes," he said, his voice growing more serious. "He's the key to everything. If we can get to him, we can take her down. But it won't be easy. He's just as much a part of the game as she is." I sat back, trying to steady my thoughts. Isabella's brother. I had no idea who he was, but if he was as connected as she was, getting to him would be like trying to break into a fortress. "We'll need a plan," I said, more to myself than to him. "We've got one," the man said, his voice unwavering. "And you're going to be the one to execute it." I looked at him, my mind still reeling, but I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't just about exposing a liar anymore. This was about taking down an empire. The weight of the plan settled on my shoulders like a 1,000-pound anchor. I was in too deep now to back out. The man's words were clear, if I wanted to stop Isabella and her empire, I had to be the one to pull the strings. Lavro, February 14, 2025, 6:26. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, everything I had believed in, everything I had trusted, was a lie. I spent the next few days preparing, meeting contacts, gathering evidence, setting traps. Every step was calculated, every word spoken with precision. But even as I moved forward, the nagging doubt never left me. What if I was just another pawn in this twisted game? What if the man I had trusted wasn't who he said he was? Finally, the day came. I was supposed to meet Isabella's brother, the key. The man who could destroy her, or give her the power to crush me forever. The plan was simple: get close to him, win his trust, and expose Isabella's entire operation. But it had one glaring flaw: trusting him meant putting everything on the line. I arrived at the location, a high-rise building in the heart of the city. The cold steel and glass reflected the city lights, casting long shadows across the street. I entered the lobby, my heart hammering in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. But I couldn't. Not now. I took the elevator to the top floor, where the door to an office suite stood open. Inside, a tall man in a tailored suit stood waiting, his back to me. His posture was rigid, controlled, exactly what I expected from someone who had been groomed by Isabella. He turned around as I entered, his face cool and unreadable. But then, something flickered in his eyes, a spark of recognition. And then it clicked. He wasn't just any businessman. This man was her husband. I staggered back, feeling the floor shift beneath me. The man I had been hunting for answers, the one I believed could bring Isabella down, was in on it. He wasn't a victim. He was a collaborator. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge of amusement. "But you didn't really think it would be that easy, did you?" My mind reeled. Everything I had done, every move I had made, it had all been a setup. A setup by Isabella. And her brother, her husband, had been playing me from the start. The world tilted, and for a moment, I was lost in the haze of betrayal. I had been so sure, so confident. But now, standing in front of him, I understood. I was nothing more than a pawn in their game. "You played me," I whispered, barely able to speak through the shock. He smiled coldly. "Oh, Ethan. You were never meant to win. You were just another part of the plan." Before I could respond, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening noise. I turned around, only to find Isabella standing there, her face cold and triumphant. She was holding a file in her hands, and she tossed it on the table with a flourish. "This is where your story ends, Ethan," she said, her voice laced with venom. "You thought you were the one calling the shots, but we've been in control the whole time." I felt my stomach drop as I stared at her, the reality crashing down. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You." Isabella smirked, taking a step closer. "You were never the target, Ethan. You were just the distraction." She stepped aside, and I saw the man behind her, a man I had thought was on my side. But now, the truth was clear. He had been working with Isabella from the beginning. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut: I was the one who had been played all along. And as Isabella's laughter filled the room, I realized with horror that I had no way out. I had been so focused on taking them down, I never realized that the entire game had been rigged from the start. The last thing I saw before the darkness overtook me was Isabella's face, a mask of victory. And then everything went black. The story ends, but the game is far from over.